After 22 years of friendship, my best friend Dana stood on a witness stand and lied under oath to save her husband from prison, testimony that sent me to jail for a theft he had actually committed using my stolen login. My name is Lindsey Marchetti, and before this happened, I believed I understood the people I trusted and the life I had built. Dana wouldn't look at me while she did it. That is the part I keep coming back to, more than anything she actually said on that witness stand. 22 years of friendship, and when the prosecutor asked her to identify the woman who falsified the Trident Ledger entries at Foss Harbor Marine Supply, she lifted her hand, pointed at the defense table, and said my name without once meeting my eyes. Lindsey Marchetti, she said, clear as a bell, like she was reading it off a grocery list. I remember thinking, absurdly, that she was wearing the earrings I'd given her for her 30th birthday. Tiny silver anchors. I'd bought them because we grew up 2 blocks from the Foss waterway and used to say we'd never leave Tacoma even when everyone else did. She wore my gift while she put me away. My name is Lindsey Marchetti. I was 39 when my best friend testified against me, and until then I had spent my whole life in Tacoma, in the same damp salt air stretch of Washington where the water makes everything feel older than it is. I had never imagined I would become the kind of person who begins a story with a courtroom and a betrayal, because before all this I was, at least on paper, painfully ordinary. I was the bookkeeper, then the office controller, at a family-owned marine supply company near Point Ruston. I paid invoices, chased down overdue accounts, balanced ledgers, argued with vendors over a missing $47 and a shipping surcharge, and knew enough about invoices and access codes that people took my competence for granted. That may sound boring. It wasn't to me. I liked the clean logic of it. Numbers did not lie unless a person made them. Accounts either balanced or they didn't. You could follow a discrepancy through columns and backups and signatures until the shape of it came into focus. That was the world I trusted. It turned out to be exactly the kind of world someone like Bree Okonkwo could use against me. Dana was my best friend. Not in the casual, adult way where people say my best friend about someone they text twice a month. I mean the real thing. We met in 7th grade in Mrs. Halverson's homeroom at a middle school that doesn't even exist anymore. It got torn down years ago and replaced with townhomes, which somehow feels insulting to the memory of those battered cinder block hallways where we first became each other's escape route. Dana and I were both 13, both awkward in different ways, both trying to figure out how to survive being girls who were expected to be smaller than our feelings. Dana was smart in the quick, bright way that made teachers overlook her mischief until it was too late. I was the serious one. I answered questions carefully, underlined things in my notebooks, and got praised for being dependable. We ended up sitting together because Mrs. Halverson mistook our silence for compatibility. She wasn't wrong. The friendship took root fast. Dana had the loud laugh. I had the long memory. She could talk anyone into almost anything. I was the one who remembered birthdays, favorite foods, who was fighting with who needed a ride after soccer practice, whose mother was sick, which aunt had the good lasagna recipe. Together we made sense. We made friendship bracelets that summer when we were 13. Blue and silver because those were the only colors left at the craft store on 6th Avenue. I still have mine. It has been on my wrist so long that the threads have softened into something almost threadbare, and the knots sit against my skin like a second pulse. I was wearing it the day she testified against me. I checked afterward, in the courthouse bathroom mirror, half convinced I would find I had ripped it off without remembering. But there it was, faded and frayed, still tied around my left wrist like an accusation. We grew up together through everything that matters in a life before it matters. First boyfriends. Broken hearts, driver's licenses, cheap apartments, jobs that made us feel grown, and jobs that proved we weren't. Dana was the one who stood beside me when my father died and stayed through the whole night without once trying to fix it. She brought takeout from our favorite Thai place, sat on my kitchen floor, and handed me tissues in the dark. I was there when she married Bree Okonkwo 11 years ago at a vineyard outside Gig Harbor, holding up her train while she cried from nerves and happiness and too much champagne. I held her hand in the hospital when she had her first miscarriage. 2 years later, I was in the waiting room again when Marcus was born, healthy and loud and furious at the world from the first second he entered it. There was a blue tin in the middle of all of it, dented on one corner, with recipe cards shuffled between our houses for years. My grandmother's dill pickles lived in that tin alongside Dana's mother's jollof rice, a peach cobbler recipe from Dana's aunt, my chocolate sheet cake, and a handwritten card for skillet cornbread so old the pencil marks had turned faint. Whoever had the tin at the time was supposed to make whatever recipe sat on top. It sounds like a small thing, but if you have ever shared a life with someone, you know the size of things is not measured by their cost. It is measured by how often they return. Paul came into our lives almost like an afterthought, which is part of why what he did was so hard to see at first. He was already working in marine sales when Foss Harbor Marine Supply hired me. Dana and I were thrilled when I told her I had landed a job with benefits after years of scrambling through payroll temp work and part-time office positions. About 8 months later, Paul joined Foss Harbor as general sales manager. He had one of those easy, polished personalities that flourish in places where being liked matters as much as being right. He shook hands like he was greeting a future client even when he was just saying hello to the receptionist. He remembered names, he laughed easily, he bought drinks after staff meetings and made jokes that landed better if you were already inclined to forgive him. I liked him, mostly because Dana loved him and because he made her laugh. He was the kind of man who could seem generous without ever being especially open. He could pour you a drink, tell a story about a bad sales trip to Spokane, and leave you feeling like you'd had a real conversation when in fact you knew little more about him than when you started. I never suspected him of anything serious, because serious suspicions are hard to fit around the daily work of living. We had children to coordinate, bills to pay, school fundraisers, holidays, moving schedules, and all the small humiliations of adulthood. You do not wake up expecting your best friend's husband to become the person who destroys your life by name. What none of us understood until much later was that Paul had been bleeding money out of Foss Harbor for nearly 2 years through a shell vendor account called Cascade Rigging Solutions. The name sounded legitimate enough if you said it quickly. It had a P.O. box in Fife, an EIN, a bare-bones website with stock photos of coiled rope and a smiling dockworker in a hard hat, and vendor paperwork that looked fine to anyone glancing at it too quickly. What it did not have, as far as anyone could determine, was a real business behind it. There was no warehouse, no inventory, no obvious customers, no employees, just invoices. Over and over, invoices. Some of them were inflated. Some were entirely fictional. All of them were paid from Foss Harbor's operating account, the same account I managed as bookkeeper and later controller. I had final payment authorization. Paul had vendor approval access as sales manager. On paper, the trail should have stopped at me. That was the point. The problem with doing business in a small office, especially one that ran on trust as much as procedure, is that people get comfortable. We shared passwords for systems when people were locked out. We logged in for one another when deadlines were tight. We approved reimbursements over the phone and reconciled everything later. It was not perfect, but it was normal in the way lots of small offices are normal. Enough structure to keep things moving, enough improvisation to keep people from drowning. I had thought it was one of the things I was good at, making a small operation efficient without making it miserable. The theft came to light during the annual audit, the one Neil Castellano insisted on every January, even when the accountant told him it was overkill. Neil owned Foss Harbor. He was old school, stubborn, and honest in a way that made him almost surprising in a world that rewards smooth liars. He believed in reconciliations, in handwritten notes, in the kind of accountability most people only pretend to value. He called me into his office on a gray morning in January, the sort where Tacoma looks like it's been washed and left to dry under a sheet of cloud. He slid a thick printout across the desk and didn't speak right away. When I looked up, I saw in his face that he already knew something was wrong and was hoping, against his own instincts, that it was a misunderstanding. The printout was a Trident Ledger audit trail report, every action logged, every timestamp, every username, 41 separate payments to Cascade Rigging Solutions, several at absurd hours, a few approved after midnight, one at 2:13 a.m. on a Sunday. The username attached to every approval was mine. I remember the sensation more than the words. The room seemed to tilt. I knew immediately what I was looking at, and I also knew it couldn't be right. Some of the transactions were dated on days I could prove I had been elsewhere. One was a Friday night when I had been at Ava's choir concert, in the school auditorium, sitting in the third row with my phone out recording her disastrous but enthusiastic version of a Sarah Bareilles song. I had the video still. I had the timestamp. At the time, I didn't know how important that would become. I only knew it was impossible for me to have been in 2 places at once. I told Neil that. I told him someone had used my login. 3 days later, a detective from Tacoma Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit came to my house with a folder and a careful, neutral expression. He asked to sit at the kitchen table. He asked if I knew what a shell company was. He asked about Cascade Rigging. He asked about my access to Trident Ledger, my passwords, my work habits, my schedule, my relationship with Paul. He asked in that way people do when they are still pretending the conversation might end with an explanation. I told him someone had stolen my credentials. I told him I did not do this. I said it so many times over the next 8 months that the sentence began to lose shape in my mouth. At first, I thought the truth would be enough. That is one of the most innocent things I have ever believed. The prosecuting attorney's office charged me with first-degree theft and computer trespass in the second degree. They built the case around the audit trail. The logs showed my credentials. The system showed my account. The transactions all flowed through my login. To people who don't live inside accounting software, that kind of evidence looks clean and final. It has the shine of certainty. What it doesn't show is motive, or context, or who leaned over whose shoulder, or whether someone had physical access to a machine already logged in, or whether a password had been quietly learned, shared, watched, or stolen. My public defender was Carla Whitmore, a competent woman with 2 phones and a face that had learned to hold exhaustion without apology. She was good, but she was also carrying too many cases, and I knew enough about the system to understand that good was not the same as enough. She told me bluntly that the state would lean hard on the audit trail and that we needed to find another story the jury could believe. I gave her Paul's name on day 1. I told her he had been the sales manager who originated vendor relationships. I told her he knew far more about our payment systems than he should have. I told her small companies run on informal access in ways that become dangerous only after the fact. I told her I had seen him in the office after hours more than once when he said he was there to finish sales reports. I told her about Cascade Rigging's mailing address in Fife and how weirdly opaque the paperwork had been. I was not accusing him without reason. I was naming the one person who had both motive and opportunity. She subpoenaed records, she got some pushback. She asked for logs, vendor forms, IP records, and access history. 6 weeks before trial, she called me into her office and told me the state had a witness who would testify she had seen me working on the Cascade Rigging account on one of the nights in question. Her name was Dana. I think there are moments in life when the mind simply refuses to understand what the ear has heard. I remember Carla speaking, and then I remember the sound in my head, like a cable snapping in a wall. "No," I said. "No, that can't be right." Carla gave me that patient look attorneys use when they have to carry your panic without absorbing it. "She's listed as an eyewitness," she said. "She claims she stopped by the office one night and saw you at your desk." I asked if Dana had given a statement voluntarily. Carla hesitated just long enough for me to feel the answer before she said it. She says she was concerned about what she saw and felt she had to come forward. Concerned, felt she had to come forward. The language of morality, sanitized and clinical. I left that meeting in a daze and called Dana 5 times before she finally answered. When she did, she sounded flustered and apologetic, the way people sound when they are trying to make bad news soft by wrapping it in affection. She said she couldn't talk about it. She said she loved me. She said she hoped I understood that she had to tell the truth. She said a lot of things that sounded like they had been fed to her by someone else. I asked if she was going to testify against me. There was a pause. Then she said, "Lindsey, please don't make this worse." That was when I knew she had chosen something over me, though I did not yet know what. The trial took place in Pierce County Superior Court in a courtroom that smelled faintly of old wood, copier toner, and rain carried in from the hallway. I wore a navy blazer I had bought, specifically because I hoped it made me look like someone who did not steal from her employer. I sat beside Carla and listened while the prosecutor, Denise Larkin, laid out the state's case with a confidence that was almost elegant. Denise was sharp, composed, and relentless in the calmest possible way. She called Neil first, then the forensic accountant, then the IT specialist who explained Trident Ledger's logs to the jury in language that made them seem more definitive than they were. The logs showed usernames and IP addresses. The payments had been approved through my credentials. The account had grown suspiciously active during the period in question. Cascade Rigging had received payments that did not match the volume of legitimate goods the company could have plausibly ordered. To the jury, it probably sounded like a straightforward embezzlement case. When Dana was called, the air in the courtroom changed. I could feel it. Even the people in the gallery who didn't know us sensed that something personal had entered the room. She walked to the stand with the same posture she had always had when she was nervous, chin slightly raised as if she were trying to convince her body to behave. She wore a pale green blouse, earrings I recognized immediately, and her wedding band. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and still would not look at me. Denise started gently. "How long have you known the defendant?" "Since 7th grade. How well did you know her?" "Very well. Were you aware of her responsibilities at Foss Harbor?" "Yes." "Were you familiar with the Trident Ledger system?" "A little, through conversations with Paul. Had you ever visited the office after hours? Sometimes. Why? To drop things off for Paul, mostly. Had you ever seen Lindsey at her desk in the evening? Yes. My stomach turned before she even got to the part that mattered. Dana testified that on March 14 she had stopped by the office to drop off a birthday cake for a staff meeting the next morning. Neil kept spare keys with a few trusted employees and spouses, she said, in case someone needed to come by after hours. She let herself in. She saw me at my desk. She saw Trident Ledger open. She saw the Cascade rigging vendor page. She said I told her I was catching up on invoicing. I remember the silence after that. It was not empty. It was crowded with all the years before it. My lawyer stood and cross-examined her. Carla asked whether Dana had ever discussed the company's internal bookkeeping structure with Paul. She asked whether Dana knew who had access to which passwords. She asked whether it was dark outside, whether the office lights were on, whether Dana was certain she had seen me and not some other woman, whether she knew what date it was, whether she could explain why my phone record and Ava's choir video placed me at a middle school auditorium miles away at the exact time she claimed to have seen me in the office. Dana had an answer for every question. Not a perfect answer, but enough of one. She said she had not checked the time. She said she remembered the date because Paul's birthday was the next day and she'd been bringing the cake. She said she had no reason to mistake me for anyone else because she knew me better than that. She said my phone could have been left at home. She said the school concert timing might have been off. She said she only knew what she saw. Every word was carefully shaped into something usable. What hurt most was not that she lied. It was how well she lied. She did not sound angry. She did not sound coerced. She sounded like a woman doing something she had convinced herself was merciful. I did not testify. Carla advised me not to take the stand, and in hindsight, she was probably right. Jurors say they want to hear from a defendant, but they really want a story that fits the frame they've already built. The risk was that I would sound defensive, emotional, guilty, or all three. So I sat there and watched the state tell a version of my life in which I was the simplest answer to a question I had not even known existed. The jury deliberated for less than 10 hours. When the foreperson stood and said guilty on first-degree theft, something in me did not so much break as become permanently unfamiliar. Guilty on computer trespass. Guilty on both counts. I remember the sound of my own breathing. I remember Tom, sitting behind me in the gallery, making a small involuntary noise that sounded like a swallowed sob. I remember Ava gripping his sleeve so hard her knuckles went white. There is a peculiar cruelty in hearing a room decide you are lying when you are telling the truth. I was sentenced in October, 19 months after the audit opened the whole thing. 9 months in the Pierce County Jail with credit for good behavior, followed by 2 years of community custody. Restitution, $341,000. The judge said the sentence reflected the seriousness of the offense, the breach of trust, and the need for accountability. I stood there trying to process how a person can be held accountable for a crime they did not commit while the people who committed it walk out of the courtroom with their lives mostly intact. I want to be clear about what conviction does to a family. It doesn't just put one person in a cage and leave the rest free. It presses on everyone with the same weight. I lost my job immediately. Foss Harbor terminated me, obviously. My bookkeeping certification became a dead thing on paper because every future employer who looked at my record would see theft and computer trespass and stop there. Tom was a machinist at a ship repair shop and made decent money, but not enough to carry a house payment, attorney fees, utility bills, school expenses, and a restitution plan all at once. We had to sell our house on North Alder, the one with the peeling blue trim that we'd spent 6 summers trying to make beautiful. Ava was 14. She spent a year telling people at Stadium High School that I was traveling for work because it was easier than saying her mother was in jail at Tacoma Avenue. She could see the building from the top of the parking garage if she wanted to, though she never admitted whether she did. I went to jail in the kind of automatic way people do when the system has already decided it is finished with them. The county jail is not a place that offers a person any grand moral insight. It is fluorescent lights, narrow beds, a daily schedule so repetitive it erases time, and the constant low hum of people trying to survive humiliation without letting it become their personality. I worked in the laundry room for a while, then in kitchen prep. I learned which officers were indifferent and which were cruel. I learned which women cried in private and which never cried at all. I counted days by meals and phone calls. Tom visited whenever he could. Ava visited less often, because 14 is old enough to understand shame and young enough to take it personally. I told myself I would get through it, that I would get out and rebuild. People say that kind of thing as if resilience is a choice that can be scheduled. When I was released, I came home to a life that had already started to proceed without me. Dana and I did not speak again. There was no dramatic final confrontation, no screaming in a parking lot, no last-minute confession before the jail doors closed. She simply vanished from my life the way someone can when you no longer share school pickups, dinner plans, or a weekly grocery run. The silence was almost worse than a fight. A fight would have meant she still regarded me as someone worth battling. Silence meant I had become a closed door. I heard secondhand that she and Paul moved from their house near Titlow Beach to a larger place up in the North End. I heard Paul was promoted to general manager after I was gone. That part made me sick in a way I still have trouble describing, because it meant the man who engineered the theft had not merely escaped consequences but been rewarded with the authority he had wanted all along. For nearly 2 years after my release, I did what convicted felons on community custody do. I reported to my corrections officer. I took whatever work I could get. I cleaned office buildings at 4 in the morning for a janitorial company because no one asked about my background if I was wearing gloves and pushing a cart before sunrise. I eventually found a bookkeeping job off the books for a landscaping company run by one of Tom's friends, a man practical enough to know that when someone's life is wrecked, you either help or you don't, and if you help, you don't make a speech about it. I paid the $400 a month because the system requires payment even from the innocent. I watched our savings disappear. I learned which bills could be delayed without immediate catastrophe and which could not. I learned how quickly people get tired of hearing that you've been wronged, even when they believe you. What cracked the story open was almost nothing. It was a Tuesday in April, and I ran into Renata Kowalski at Metropolitan Market on Proctor Street. Renata had been in our wider circle in high school, not one of Dana's inner circle exactly, but close enough to have attended both baby showers and a few birthday dinners. She knew me well enough to be awkward around me now, which in itself told me she knew I had become a cautionary tale. We were both standing in the cereal aisle pretending to compare prices when she said, almost casually, "I always thought it was weird that Dana never wanted to talk about your case." I looked at her. She seemed instantly sorry she'd said anything. But the sentence was already out. She went on because people do that when they've opened a door they didn't intend to open. At book club, any time it came up, she'd just shut it down. Change the subject. Paul used to get this look. "What look?" I asked, like he was waiting to see if she'd say something. I remember the words with perfect clarity because they were small enough to be believable. Not proof, not even close, just something off-center in a story I had accepted as final. I went home and made dinner. I checked Ava's homework. I folded laundry. I did all the ordinary things you do when you have just been handed a sentence that might upend your life again, and you are too tired to be reckless about it. Then I lay awake half the night turning Renata's line over in my head. The next morning I called Ted Halloran, the post-conviction relief attorney I had found 2 years earlier through a legal aid clinic at the University of Puget Sound. He was the first lawyer who had looked at my case after conviction and not treated me like a nuisance. At the time, he had told me, as gently as an honest person can say something discouraging, that without new evidence there was nothing to file. Courts do not reopen convictions because someone's old friend seems strange at book club, but he remembered me. When I told him what Renata had said, he did not dismiss it. "It's not evidence," he said, "but it's a reason to go looking for some." He referred me to Bree Okonkwo, a private investigator and former Tacoma PD financial crimes detective who had left the department 4 years earlier and now did precisely the kind of work my life had come to require. Bree had a patient, unsentimental way of asking questions. She did not promise justice. She promised diligence, which is a much more useful thing. I met her at a coffee shop on 6th Avenue with $400 in savings I could not afford to spend. I told her everything from the beginning because there was no point pretending I had a polished narrative. I gave her the audit trail, the times I could prove I had been elsewhere, the choir concert video of Ava singing under the auditorium lights, Dana's testimony, Paul's role at Foss Harbor, the weirdness of Renata's line about Paul looking like he was waiting for Dana to say something. Bree listened without interrupting except once. She asked, "If your login was used at 2 in the morning on nights you can prove you weren't near a computer. Who else had physical access to a machine logged into your account? And who had a motive to make sure the money trail pointed away from himself?" I said Paul. She nodded and said, "Then we stop trying to prove a negative about you. We start building a positive case about him." That sentence was the first hopeful thing I'd heard in years. It took her 5 months. I paid her in pieces, which meant we borrowed time from everywhere else. Ava's orthodontia got pushed out. Tom and I fought about the money once, badly, in the kitchen after too little sleep and too much fear. He was not against the investigation. He was against the possibility that I would spend the last of what we had chasing something we might never be able to prove. He had seen what the conviction had done to me, and to Ava, and to our marriage. He was scared that more hope would only mean more pain. He wasn't wrong to be scared. Bree began with the business records for Cascade Rigging Solutions. The registered agent's address traced after 2 records requests and a long afternoon with a patient clerk at the Pierce County Auditor's Office, to a UPS store mailbox rented under the name of Paul's cousin, Desmond Okafor. Desmond worked in Renton, had a legitimate job, and by all appearances had made the classic mistake of allowing family to borrow his name for cash and convenience. Bank records showed sporadic wire transfers from the Cascade account to Desmond, totaling just under $60,000 over the relevant period. That was a clue, not a case. Bree needed something that tied Dana directly to Paul's scheme, because what would prove the lie was not just that Paul stole money. It was that Dana knew he had done it when she pointed at me in court and called me the thief. That meant proving she was not merely mistaken or confused, but knowingly false. This is where the blue tin came back in. Bree learned through a mutual contact that Dana and Paul had done a major purge after moving to the North End. They had donated boxes of kitchen items and household clutter to a Goodwill on South Tacoma Way, instead of selling or sorting the items themselves. Most people throw away old things without thinking. But Bree remembered me mentioning the recipe tin, and she asked whether Dana would have let it go. It was the sort of long-shot investigators chase more often than it pays off, but Bree was good enough to know that a low-probability lead is still a lead if no one else is looking. She spent 2 weeks calling second-hand stores and thrift shops asking after a dented blue tin with recipe cards inside. The request sounded odd enough that the employees remembered her. She found it in a thrift store on 38th Street, still sitting on a shelf with a price tag of $1.50. The recipe cards were inside. My grandmother's dill pickle recipe was there in my own handwriting. Dana's mother's jollof rice card was there too, and underneath the bottom layer of cards, flat against the tin's base, like something tucked away in a hurry, was an old prepaid flip phone. The battery was dead. The case was dusty. It looked like junk. Bree could have ignored it. Instead, she paid a digital forensics lab in Seattle to extract whatever data was left. It held 46 text messages between 2 numbers. One of them traced to a second prepaid line Paul had purchased with cash at a Fred Meyer, around the same time Neil ordered the audit. The other was never formally registered to anyone, but the messages made the pattern unmistakable. One referenced picking up M from soccer, and Marcus had club soccer that season. Another mentioned the invoice push. Another said, if it's her account, it's her problem. The contents were not ambiguous to someone who already knew what to look for. The messages grew worse as Bree and Ted read through them together. Are you sure this works? It has to. Neil trusts her, not us. Everyone already thinks I'm just sales. If it's her account, it's her problem. I can't lie under oath, Paul. You're not lying. You're remembering wrong. There's a difference. And if I go to prison, Marcus loses his father. Is that what you want? I hate you for this. Then hate me after. Not during. The last one sent before Dana testified made the room where Bree showed it to me go very still. I still remember the exact sensation of seeing those words. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were so banal in their cruelty. He was not threatening her with a gun or blackmailing her with a secret affair. He was doing something more ordinary and therefore more dangerous. He was making their child a hostage to her conscience. Bree also dug up the school concert alibi. Ava's phone backup, which had survived through a cloud account no one had bothered to check, showed me in the 3rd row of the Mason Middle School auditorium at 7:42 p.m. on March 14th, the exact evening Dana claimed she'd seen me at the office. The timestamp and location data were enough to establish I was not where she said I was. It was the kind of fact that had existed all along and only needed the right person to ask about it. Ted prepared a motion for a new trial based on newly discovered evidence. He filed Bree's full report with the court, the Cascade rigging registration trail, the wire transfers to Desmond, the forensic extraction report on the burner phone, the chain of custody from thrift store shelf to lab, and Ava's time-stamped phone backup. Denise Larkin, the same prosecutor who had tried me the first time, reviewed the motion herself rather than handing it off to someone else. I will never know exactly what she felt reading those messages, but I know she did something that mattered. Once her own office's forensic examiner confirmed the phone data was real and unchanged, she did not fight the motion. Ted relayed her words to me later because he thought I'd need them exactly as she said them. She said she would rather reopen a case and be right than protect a conviction and be wrong. That sentence does not erase what happened. Nothing does. But it matters that it was said. The Pierce County Superior Court vacated my conviction in June, 14 months after Renata stopped me in that cereal aisle. The prosecuting attorney's office then filed new charges against Paul Okafor: first-degree theft, computer trespass, and identity theft in the first degree for using my login to move payments through Cascade rigging. Dana was charged separately with perjury and rendering criminal assistance. The day the judge announced the conviction was vacated, I sat very still and waited for the moment to feel like relief. It did, but not cleanly. It also felt like a delayed collision with all the years I'd lost. I called Tom from the courthouse steps and he cried before I did. Ava, who had been in the building with me, pressed her face into my shoulder and held on so hard I could barely breathe. Paul fought the charges for a while. His new attorney was considerably more expensive than Carla had ever been able to be for me, and I found myself resenting the money itself, the way wealth can buy time, patience, and a more flattering interpretation of your behavior. But the burner phone texts and the financial records made his options narrow. He pleaded guilty 8 months later to reduce charges in exchange for a recommended sentence. He received 6 years. Dana's case moved differently. Her attorney argued that Paul had manipulated and controlled her, that she had believed him when he told her that if he went down, Marcus would lose his father and the family would collapse. There was some evidence for coercion, and I can understand, intellectually, why a jury might have responded to it. I am not made of stone. I know what fear can do inside a marriage. I know what it means to believe your children's future depends on appeasing the person who holds the money and the house and the narrative. But I was not on that jury, and I was not able to experience mercy as absolution. Dana pleaded to perjury, received 15 months, and served 4 before an early release followed by 2 years of supervised probation. I heard all of this through lawyers and filings and people who were careful to tell me only what I needed to know. I was formally exonerated the following spring. My record was vacated and sealed. My bookkeeping license eligibility was restored. The state awarded compensation under Washington's wrongful conviction statute, calculated by day of incarceration and year of post-release supervision. It was money, finally, but it was not justice in any complete sense. No check can restore the house on North Alder, the years Ava spent lying for me at school, or the sound of my own name spoken with certainty in a courtroom by the girl who knew it best in the world. Still, the compensation meant I could stop paying the monthly restitution that had never belonged to me. It meant I could breathe without measuring every purchase against a debt I did not owe. I got the recipe tin back from Bree in a manila envelope after the investigation ended. The burner phone had been removed for evidence and never returned, which I understand. I do not resent that. The tin itself felt heavier than it should have. Or maybe I had become someone who notices weight differently. My grandmother's dill pickle recipe was still there, stained faintly from its time in a thrift store donation box. Dana's mother's jollof rice card was still tucked behind it. I have never thrown it away. I could not bring myself to treat a recipe card like a criminal simply because it was near one. I still make the pickles every August. Some years Ava helps. She is older now, and there are conversations between us that took years to become possible. I have told her the truth in full, because I decided early on that she deserved the whole shape of what happened, not the polished version adults sometimes hand children to protect themselves. I have told her about the friendship, the betrayal, the fear, the court, the jail, and the things that survived. I have also told her what I learned the hard way, that friendship is not proof against betrayal, that trust is only as strong as the person holding it, and that love can be used as leverage by people who know exactly where to press. There are moments when I think about Dana with more complexity than anger allows. I do not forgive her, not exactly. But I do understand, at least partly, how a life can narrow until the wrong thing seems like the only thing. She chose her husband, her son, her fear, and her own self-protective silence over me. That choice destroyed me for a while. But I am still here. That is the part neither of them accounted for. Tacoma kept moving while my life stopped. Ferries still crossed the water. Rain still darkened the sidewalks on Pacific Avenue. People still bought rope and anchors and fishing gear at Foss Harbor. The world has a way of not noticing individual collapses unless you force it to. Sometimes I stand in my kitchen and look at the blue tin on the shelf and think about how ordinary objects outlive the people who use them. A dented tin, a recipe card, a cheap flip phone hidden where no one thought to look. That was enough, in the end, to undo a lie that had taken almost 2 years to build. It doesn't feel satisfying the way justice stories are supposed to feel. There was no thunderclap, no grand speech, no cinematic confession. There was a cereal aisle, a patient investigator, a dead phone in a thrift store tin, and a best friend who looked everywhere except at me while she put my name into the record as if it belonged to someone else. I think about her earrings sometimes, the little silver anchors. I bought them because we used to say we'd never leave Tacoma. Maybe that was the problem. We thought staying in the same place meant we would stay the same people. It doesn't work that way. I don't wear the bracelet every day anymore. Some mornings I leave it off. Some days I need the reminder more than I need the comfort. The frayed blue and silver threads have become less a symbol of friendship than a record of survival. I keep both lessons now. One is that the people closest to you can break your life. The other is that truth, if you keep following it patiently, has a way of coming back around even when it arrives late and bruised, and carrying someone else's old mistakes with it. I only needed one of those lessons twice.